Thick white fog hung like heavy cotton and packed the death trap called Severed Dragon Gorge. The American David leaned against a giant boulder coated in slick moss. He stared in despair at the deep dive watch on his wrist. Its hands had stopped moving long ago. Time itself felt frozen inside this silent space. He was a seasoned hiker from Boston. He could not understand why he had slipped from the plank path on Yellow Mountain. He had woken up in this strange deep valley where even a satellite phone received not a shred of signal. His Arc'teryx shell jacket had been shredded into rags by Thorns the tourist, who once looked respectable, now looked like a beggar. The energy bars in his pack had been gone for 3 days to stay alive. He had to search the valley floor for anything he could swallow. Down here there was nothing but slick moss and pools that stank of rot. Now and then he could catch 1 or 2 tiny fish. Even that could not chase away the cold that had sunk into his bones. The stream water was ice cold. His lips had turned purple. A low fever burned on his forehead and blurred his vision. A twisting pain in his belly churned like a dull knife turning inside him. Worse still, the walls of Severed Dragon Gorge rose on every side like cliffs that went up forever. The sight alone stole his breath. Every survival trick from the civilized world meant nothing here. Hallucinations began to crawl into his mind. He believed the world had forgotten him. He believed he was doomed to become part of the mud at the bottom of this gorge. When night fell, a sudden downpour shattered the silence. The wind whipped fat raindrops against the ground. The creek that had been dry a moment ago swelled in an instant. Muddy floodwater roared down the gorge. Instinct for survival forced David to burn the last of his strength. He clawed his way up through the mud using hands and feet. He stumbled and scrambled into a hidden cave halfway up the rock wall. The cave was dry and cold. David sucked in air in huge ragged breaths. Still shaking, he backed deeper inside to hide from the storm. Then a sickly white bolt of lightning tore across the night sky. The flash flooded the cave and lit up the deepest shadow. A person was sitting there. It was an old man with hair and beard completely white. He wore a wide gray Taoist robe. His whole body seemed fused with the darkness. His eyes were closed. His face was calm, almost sacred. It was as if he had been meditating here for countless years. Thunder rolled through the valley. It did not disturb him at all. In front of him, a plain ancient long sword was planted in the ground. Fine lightning patterns coiled along the blade. A faint electric glow breathed from it. A trace of thunder aura flowed around the old man. It formed an invisible pressure that made David hold his breath without meaning to. He tried to run on instinct. His legs felt as heavy as if filled with lead. The old man kept the solemn posture of deep meditation. Across his knees rested a scroll made from beast hide with an ancient sheen in the lightning glare. David could make out a few bold Chinese characters on the cover. A chilling mystery seeped from that scroll and made his heart tighten. Outside the cave, the rain curtain fell like an iron gate that sealed off heaven and earth. Inside the deep rock hollow, only a pile of bones and a stranger from another land faced each other in silence. David held the beast hide scroll with shaking hands. By the faint ghostly fire and the stuttering flashes of lightning, he finally saw the drawings on it. They were human body charts, twisted and tense like something alive. Red lines crawled across the figure and mapped a path he could almost feel under his skin. He could not read the ancient tadpole-like script. Even so, the posture in those pictures felt like it carried a law of the world itself. In his desperation, he grabbed it like the last rope on a sinking man. To fight off hunger and terror that were ready to eat his mind, he bared his teeth and tried the first opening stance. But the arts of cultivation were not something a mortal could copy on a whim. David did not know the breathing and circulation formulas. He only forced his joints into the pose and twisted his body past its limits. Chi and blood inside him broke loose like wild horses. A scorching current like molten rock appeared from nowhere. It slammed through his dry meridians and tore forward without control. Pain exploded through him and he screamed. His body went limp like he had been shocked. Every bone and every tendon felt ground into dust. He could not even move one finger. Cold sweat flooded out and soaked his torn jacket. He realized with horror that he had not gained strength. He had pushed himself into a paralyzed dead end right then. A wave of wet air rolled into the cave, carrying a nauseating stink of blood. 2 green lanterns lit up in the darkness. A low roar followed, heavy with warning and authority. A massive striped tiger had also rushed in to escape the flash. Flood, its sharp nose caught the scent of a living man at once. It lowered its body. Thunder rumbled in its throat step by step. It pressed toward David where he lay helpless on the ground. Death had never looked so clear. Inside him, the runaway true Chi cut like blades. Outside him, the tiger opened a mouth wide enough to swallow his future. His pupils tightened and his heart hammered against his ribs when the tiger kicked off with its hind legs and lunged through the stench. Pure terror emptied his mind into a dead white silence. It was the last flare of life before the end. The violent heat in his body suddenly answered a raw will to live as if guided by instinct. It followed the red line from the chart. It forced its way through a bottleneck. Time seemed to stop. David lifted his right arm without thinking. He threw the most unconscious punch of his life. He also threw the strongest punch of his life. Boom. A dull blast cracked the air. A faint gold light burst out from his knuckles. That fist force strong enough to split stone drove straight into the tiger between the eyes. Bones snapped in one clean instant. The huge beast did not even have time to cry out. Its heavy body flew back like a broken sack. It slammed into the rock wall. Brains and blood scattered, and it died on the spot. David stared at his own fist in a stunned trance. The golden stream curled back into his body. It became the first thread of gentle true chi. It sank into his dantian and settled there. In that single breath between life and death, he finally pushed open the door to this mysterious world. The tiger was dead, but its fearsome presence still lingered for the starving David. That huge carcass was a gift drop from the sky. He forced down the stench of raw blood and meat. He tore into tiger flesh and swallowed it in great mouthfuls. As the food hit his stomach, the faint thread of gold energy in his dantian found fuel. That thread swelled fast and steady. The meridians that had screamed from his reckless breakthrough began to calm under warm power. In that moment, he believed it for real. The beast-hide scroll in his hands was not just strange Eastern martial arts. It was the only thing that could keep him alive in this death valley. In the mountains, there were no calendars. Cold ended and years passed without a name. Severed Dragon Gorge felt forgotten by time. Only the waterfall dropping from the sheer cliff roared day and night. It was the one sound that counted the passing of days. David threw away his old life as a modern city man. He stopped tracking dates. He stopped waiting for rescue. Day after day, he studied the charts before the bleached skeleton. Like an ascetic, he tempered bone and tendon in the most primitive way. At the start, he could barely shove a stone lock that weighed 100 jin. His movements were stiff, like a wooden puppet. Each session felt like punishment. After 3 years, he could spring and shift across slick moss boulders like a wild ape. His body moved clean and sharp. After 7 years, he stood naked beneath a 1,000-chai waterfall. He let the crushing water hammer his spine. He held his ground like a pine tree. The roar of chi and blood inside him rose so loud it drowned the torrent seasons. Turned in 10 years flesh by the pale American tourist who once panicked that every sound was gone in his place, stood a wild man wrapped in mottled beast hide. Long hair fell to his shoulders. His beard jutted like spear points. Years of wind and frost carved his skin into rough bronze. Those years also forged his flesh into steel. Under every bulging muscle slept a force ready to explode at dawn. David stood by the icy pool at the valley floor. He drew in a deep breath and lifted his chest. High he eased into the stance of golden dragon. Fist his joints cracked in a rapid chain like beans. Bursting in a pan, he threw a casual punch at the giant rock. Beside him the motion looked slow, yet it was fast as thunder. A dull blast hit the air. Hard granite caved in under his fist and formed a deep crater. Stone shards sprayed out. Dust rolled up in a thick cloud. He did not even use full strength. Even so, a low dragon roar seeped out with a strike. Deep in the forest, packs of wolves and hulking black bears caught that aura. It clamped their tails and trembled as they fled. None of them dared make a sound in this sealed-off wasteland. He had evolved from prey into the one true ruler. The fog at the mouth of Severed Dragon Gorge never lifted. It hung like a gray chasm that cut off life and hope. A stale, wet rot filled the air. It felt nothing like the rich spirit chi inside the gorge. David stood between two knife-cut cliffs. Ahead looked like empty space, but an invisible wall blocked the way like iron and bronze. 10 years had sharpened his eyes into a hawk glare. He wanted freedom. He wanted to return to a world of neon and hot coffee. He wanted to hear the roar of traffic. One more time he drew a deep breath. Muscle cords knotted across his frame. Golden spirit power raced beneath his skin. He roared, and loose stones rattled down the cliffs. He drove a full-strength punch into the empty air. No shattering answered him, only a hard humming. As the air trembled, the unseen barrier moved like living fluid. It swallowed the force that could split mountains. Then it burst with a savage rebound. It flung him dozens of meters. It slammed him into the dirt. He tried again and again, and every attempt ended the same. The strength he once trusted felt tiny and ridiculous. Inside this cage of heaven and earth, defeat flooded over him like a tide. He dragged his aching body back to the cave that had sheltered him at the start. He collapsed. Beside the bleached skeleton, a stray glance caught the rock wall behind it. The violent impact had peeled away a corner of thick moss. Under it lay a few carved marks that felt ancient and deep. He sat up at once. He scraped away the rest of the moss with frantic hands. A new set of diagrams spread across the stone. There were no strikes and no stances, only the lines of mountains and rivers, only the tracks of wind and cloud and changing weather. In that moment, he understood why he had failed for 10 years. He had trained shape and brute power. He had never learned to borrow the weight of the world around him. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. He stopped forcing chi and blood to surge. He tuned his breathing until it matched the pulse of the gorge, wind, and water, and the slow breath of stone gathered inside his mind like a single flood. 3 days later, David returned to the mouth of Severed Dragon Gorge. This time he did not shout. This time his muscles did not swell in rage. He raised one hand in calm silence. He followed the direction of the wind and sent out a single punch. It looked light and gentle, yet it carried the weight of the entire Severed Dragon Gorge. The air rippled in layers where his fist passed. A clear cracking sound rang out. The invisible barrier that had held him for 10 years melted away, like spring ice. Wind shifted and clouds darkened the gorge, answered with a long echo. A road to the outside finally opened beneath his feet. As the invisible barrier shattered behind him, David drew a deep breath of air from the outside world. There was no sweetness and no freshness. What rushed into his lungs was a choking smell of scorched ash and heavy blood. The spirit chi that had filled Severed Dragon Gorge felt like a dream that had ended. Blackwind Plains spread out before him, like a painting of hell. Thick black smoke covered the sky and hid the sun. The ground was burned dark, and cracked bodies lay everywhere, not only soldiers. More were unarmed farmers and women and children. There were no city lights and no warm signs of civilization, only the silence and ruin left behind. After Cultivators ran, wild rage rolled in his chest like molten rock. His steps sped up. Then his whole body blurred into a fading shadow as he rushed toward a distant town where flames still flickered between broken walls and collapsed roofs. A man in a black robe laughed as if the world belonged to him. He was a hallmaster of Black Flame sect. He toyed with the last few survivors and roasted them with fireballs, like a cat playing with trapped mice in his eyes. Those mortals were lower than livestock. The hall master sensed a strange presence closing in, and he whipped his head around. When he saw David with shredded clothes and tangled blonde hair, his caution turned into contempt. In this world, David looked like an uncivilized wild man. The hall master snorted and did not bother to ask where he came from. He raised a hand and struck with Black Flame palm. Dark red flame screamed through the air and carried a vicious poison that could corrode anything. The spell would turn an ordinary man into ash in a heartbeat. David did not dodge. David did not even blink. He stood like an ancient golden body Arhat and let the black fire crash into his chest. The roar faded, and the smoke thinned. The hallmaster face froze. A faint dark gold glow flowed across the bare upper body of David. Black Flame palm left not even the smallest wound. It did not even singe a single hair on his body. David calmly brushed at dust that was not there. The blue eyes of David held no human emotion at all, only a pure pressure that made it hard to breathe. The hallmaster's stare froze. Solid, the Black Flame palm that could melt gold and iron vanished in silence before David's bare chest. He did not even have time to wonder how a mortal with no spirit power could take fire with his body. David moved. There was no sign of spirit power and no answer from the heaven and earth spirit. Only the scorched ground under his feet shattered into powder. An afterimage still lingered where he stood. His real body had already crossed dozens of yards like a heavy cannon. Shot. The hallmaster pupils shrank hard. He saw that sharp-cut western face right in front of him. The cold in those blue eyes was sharper than the 10,000-year black eyes of the far north. Instinct screamed at him to raise a protective shield or crush an escape talisman. Everything was too slow. David clenched his right fist. He pulled it back only a few inches. Then he snapped it forward. There was no dazzling light. There was no screaming wind. There was only force stripped down to its purest edge. A dull boom burst across Blackwind Plains. That short-range punch landed dead center on the hallmaster lower belly dantian. Time seemed to hang for a heartbeat, then bones cracked in a brutal chain. The hallmaster eyes bulged. His whole body folded like a boiled shrimp. Even his scream jammed in his throat and would not come out. The impact tore through flesh and burst a white shockwave in the air behind him. He flew backward like a kite with its string cut. He smashed through 2 broken walls. He slammed into a huge boulder and sank into it. Blood sprayed from his mouth. In a torrent, chunks of ruined organs rode the spray. The full breath of his presence collapsed in an instant. His chi in the dantian had been shattered by that one punch. Decades of cultivation spilled away into nothing. The battlefield fell into a dead silence. Black Flame sect disciples holding spirit weapons forgot how to breathe. The mortal survivors on their knees forgot how to breathe. They had never seen a fight like this. No hand seals, no chance, no treasures, no flying sword, only one body and one fist. A foundation establishment. Expert had been crippled in one strike. David slowly drew his fist back. His golden hair whipped in the hot wind. He looked like an invincible war god forged in gold armor. He did not chase down the cripple to finish him. He turned his head. His icy gaze swept over the other Black Flame sect disciples, who were already stunned out of their minds. One rough word rolled out of his throat. Go. That word hit like a pardon from death itself. The cultivators who used to bully and slaughter broke apart in terror. They threw up escape light and fled in a scramble. They did not dare spare a glance for their own hall. Master, they only feared being one step too slow. The people who survived crawled out from the rubble with shaking limbs. They stared at the tall back standing on scorched earth. Awe and fever burned in their eyes. It looked like worship for a god who had stepped down into dust. In this land of despair, a legend began. The news of Black Flame sect collapse spread like it had grown wings across 100 miles before half a day had passed. A streak of green light cut across the sky. A flying boat carved with painted beams and carved rafters drifted down onto the burned ruins. The visitors were not Black Flame sect leftovers coming for revenge. They were Azure Cloud sect who called themselves the righteous path in this region. The man at the front was the elder Lin Shu. She wore a spotless white robe that did not seem to touch the dust. His hair and beard were white, and at first glance he looked like a proper immortal. He lifted one hand in a casual wave. Several disciples behind him carried up 3 heavy chests. The lids opened and gold, silver, and jewels flashed in the dead gray light of the ruins. 2 young women followed close behind. Their bodies were graceful, and their faces were pretty. Their heads stayed lowered, and their shoulders shook with fear. It was obvious they had been delivered like goods along with the treasure. Lin Shu stacked a smile on his face and clasped his hands toward David. He called David a foreign hero. He praised the punch that killed a Black Flame sect hall master. As a joy to the heart, he said he came on behalf of Azure Cloud sect to invite David. He offered David the position of guest elder. He promised the treasure, and the women would all belong to David. He promised endless wealth and comfort from that day forward. David stopped wiping his fist. His blue eyes swept across the gold and silver. Then his gaze settled on the 2 trembling women in this world of cultivators. It might have been called high respect to David, who came from modern civilization. It was nauseating. He caught the faint contempt and calculation Lin Shu could not fully hide. It was the look someone used on a sharp tool. It was not the look someone used on a person. Azure Cloud sect did not value David as a man. They only wanted his terrifying body. They wanted to use him as a shield against Black Flame sect. Take your things and go. David's voice was low, but it carried disgust that could not be argued with. He rose to his feet. His tall shadow swallowed Lin Shu whole. That pure pressure made even a late-stage foundation establishment. Elder feel his heart jumped. The fake smile on Lin Shu's face stiffened. Then it cracked apart inch by inch. The real cold malice showed through. He did not expect a barbarian with no spirit power to refuse him. He dropped the mask of false pity. He gave a hard snort and snapped his sleeve. Spirit chi surged around him and shook dust into the air. What an arrogant fool who does not know the height of heaven and the depth of earth. Lin Shu spoke in a voice like poison. Miskilling intent shone openly in his eyes. In this world of the strong eating the weak, you have no sect to protect you. You will not live long on brute strength alone. You refuse the wine of respect and choose the punishment cup when Black Flame sect forces press, and I hope your bones stay as hard as your mouth. Lin Shu did not spare the surviving people. A single glance, he drove the flying boat into the sky and vanished. Only the last edge of his threat lingered and echoed over the ruins. David watched the fading green streak. The cold in his eyes only deepened. He finally understood that righteous and demonic were just 2 masks on the same face echoing. Gorge looked like a scar the heavens had forgotten. It wound through the deep mountains on both sides. Sheer cliffs rose like blades and axes and stabbed into the clouds. Cold wind howled here. All year, even the smallest sound of a falling stone could be bent by the strange rock walls. It would turn into shrieking wails like ghosts crying. Gray fog drifted low to the ground. It moved slow like countless wronged souls searching for a body to take. It painted this place into a natural graveyard. Lai led 12 elite killers of Black Flame sect. They slipped through the mist like phantoms. They closed in without a sound. They sealed off the dead end at the valley floor. In his eyes, the foreign barbarian named David stood with his back to them. Li Lai believed David had nowhere left to run. He had even dared to barge into this deadly place. The black long saber in Lai hand slid from its sheath. Inch by inch a dark red blood groove ran along the blade, killing intent. Locked onto the bulky figure ahead, Lai was about to give the order to cut this prey into pieces. At the instant the killing intent reached its peak, David spun around. Those clear blue eyes held no panic at all. They held only calm that looked bottomless. David did not charge the killers. He shifted his body and dropped his stance. The force in his fist compressed in a savage crush. Then he did not strike at any enemy. He slammed his fist into a rock node beside him that looked ordinary. There was no earth-shattering explosion. Instead, it triggered something far more terrifying, a brutal physical resonance. A deep dragon roar burst from inside the rock wall. The roar was caught by the funnel-shaped terrain of echoing gorge. It was bent and reflected and layered over itself before the first wave could fade. The second and third wave stacked on top of it. High-frequency jindan ripped through the gorge. Stone pillars cracked and crumbled. Loose rocks fell like rain. The most horrifying part was what happened to the Cultivators' defenses. Protective spirit light and spirit power shields shattered like glass. They broke under countless rapid vibrations. Those with weaker cultivation bled from 7 openings at once. Their screams were swallowed by the endless echoing dragon roar. Their divine sense was smashed apart. They collapsed soft and lifeless to the ground. Even Lili with deep cultivation felt needles stabbing his mind. His sea of consciousness churned and split. The long saber slipped from his hand and hit the ground. He clutched both ears in agony. He still could not block the soul-piercing destroyer. Sound his eyes rolled back. He passed out among the rocks. In only a few breaths, the proud killing squad was wiped out. The sound waves died away. The gorge fell back into dead silence. David walked to the unconscious Lili with no expression. He grabbed Lili by the collar like dragging a dead dog. He strode toward the left side of the gorge mouth. He headed for a hidden pile of broken rocks. Linshu was there. David tossed Lili at Linshu's feet. The heavy body hit the ground and kicked up dust. David stood above Linshu and looked down. Linshu's face went stiff. David said, "One cold line, your blade is dull." Black flame sect mountain gate rose beside the mouth of a living volcano. Crimson magma churned below it, guided by the mountain guarding formation. It became a sulfur poison fog that never dispersed. An ordinary cultivator would have their lungs and organs rot from a single bee. Wrath. David stood at the base of 1,000 stone steps. He lifted his head and stared at the crimson gate that looked like a path into hell. He took one step forward. The blue stone under his foot cracked at once. A dull boom sounded like a war drum. The sound ran up the mountain and reached the summit. Hundreds of Black Flame Secta Gate disciples rushed out at the noise. They held spirit weapons and formed ranks. When they saw the foreigner climbing the steps, a shiver of instinct seized their hearts. An invisible pressure fell like a mountain. Some disciples did not even have time to summon flying swords. Their knees slammed into the stone. Bones creaked through their bodies. Blood spilled from mouths and noses. They could only watch that towering figure close in like a god or a demon. Someone dares break the formation alone inside the Black Flame sect. Great Hall 7 elders raged and laughed at once. They joined hands and drove the sect defense formation. In a blink, the sky was dyed blood red by firelight. Fire clouds rolled across the heavens. Countless molten stones the size of millstones fell from above. David did not change his expression. He slowly opened his stance. He did not understand formations. He did not cultivate spirit power. But his eyes had been tempered for 10 years by Golden Dragon Fist intent. He could clearly see the fragile nodes where spirit chi flowed. With a low roar, David threw one punch this time. The Golden Fist force did not burst outward. It crushed the air ahead of him to the extreme. It created an absolute vacuum. Felt the falling fire and stone. Behind him, the stone steps lay in ruins and disciples wailed across the wreckage. Before him, the Black Flame sect top fighters had faces like death. The century-old foundation was finally trampled flat by these iron fists today. Just as he finished leveling the ruins of Black Flame sect, the smell of smoke still clung to David. He dropped from the sky like a meteor and landed at the foot of Azure Cloud sect, different from the arrogance of Black Flame sect. Azure Cloud sect hid deep where clouds swallowed the mountains. White mist coiled around the peaks all year. It looked immortal and pure, but it hid countless killing moves. That mist did more than block sight. It seeped into pores. It numbed nerves. It brewed endless illusions. The moment David stepped through the mountain gate, the world changed. The flat stone steps vanished. A bottomless abyss opened under his feet. Countless fierce ghosts crawled up from the depths. They bared fangs and claws and rushed at him. David slowly closed his eyes. In 10 years on sheer cliffs, he learned one thing above all: do not trust the eyes. Trust instinct. Sight can be fooled, but the tremor of moving air never lies in the world of his senses. Those ghosts were only scattered spirit chi. In the chaos of that fog, several nodes burned like lighthouses in the night. There was only pure speed and pure strength. David shifted his body and slipped past an invisible wind blade. Then his right fist drew back like a bow pulled to the limit. He drove it out. This punch struck empty space, but it rang like metal smashing metal. A clear crack split the air. It sounded like a giant mirror shattering under a sledgehammer. The abyss and the ghosts filled with fractures in an instant. Then they collapsed and turned into drifting light. The fog illusion realm was brittle glass before absolute power. Inside Azure Cloud Hall, Elder Linshu sprang to his feet. The teacup in his hand shattered on the floor through water mirror. He saw the foreigner pushing forward with savage force, step by step. An illusion realm that could trap a core formation cultivator was thin paper before a monster who relied on flesh alone. The collapse of the mountain guarding formation roared like a death bell had hammered against Linshu's heart. When the last mist faded, David was already at the hall entrance. Morning light poured over his corded muscles. He looked like a golden Heaven War god Linshu shook from head to toe before he could speak. David reached out and lifted Linshu into the air like a chick. Cold eyes pierced the final line of Linshu will. The master of illusions finally tasted the most real fear. Linshu's body was flung toward the corner of the great hall like a torn sack. Two terrifying pressures descended at once. They covered the entire summit of Azure Cloud Peak in a single breath. Black Flame Sect Lord Yen Wuji finally appeared after long seclusion. Azure Cloud Sect Master Xianxia also appeared at the same time. Both men understood that if one fell, the other would follow at this moment. They held nothing back. They took left and right positions. They sealed the flow of heaven and earth and formed a killing pincer. Black flames rolled around Yan Wuji. He had burned essence blood to drive heaven's scorching black fire. The heat twisted the empty air until it looked deformed. Black fire gathered into a savage giant python. It opened its maw and bit down toward David. Xianxia struck in tandem. One force was hot, and one force was cold. One force was hard, and one force was hard. And one force was soft. The combined blow of two nascent soul peak experts carried enough might to level the entire mountain peak. Even the surrounding air screamed with piercing explosive sounds. David did not retreat a single step. Instead, he slowly sank his hips and planted his stance. He drew in one deep breath. His chest swelled like a bellows. Blood roared inside him like rivers in flood. A dazzling metallic sheen flared across his skin in an instant. This was the sign of Golden Dragon Fist pushed to its extreme. This was also the prelude to body sanctification. Golden Dragon subdues the world. David gave a low shout. The space behind him shattered. A five-clawed golden dragon phantom appeared from nothing. It stretched more than 1,000 feet in length. It was no longer a blurry surge of force. It looked almost solid. Scales and claws rose in sharp detail. Ancient divinity and majesty poured from it like a tide. The golden dragon threw its head back and roared at the sky. The sound waves scattered the poison needles that filled the air. Then David slowly pressed his right palm downward. A gigantic golden dragon claw fell like a mountain, collapsing from above. There was no deadlock at all. The arrogant black fire python melted the instant it touched the golden light. The massive golden palm print ignored every defensive treasure and every layer of protective aura. It fell with absolute might. Yan Wuji and Xianxia were crushed into the dirt like two flies. Bones shattered through their bodies. Blood poured from their mouths. Moving even one finger became an impossible luxury before absolute power. The so-called foundation of a sect was nothing but a joke. The smoke cleared, and a massive 5-finger crater sat in Azure Cloud Peak like a brand left by a god at the bottom. Yan Wuji and Xianxia gasped for breath. Their nascent soul majesty was gone. Torn robes mixed with blood and mud. Only fear of the blonde man remained. They stared at him in terror. They waited for the final judgment. David drew back the suffocating golden radiance around his body. He looked like an ordinary foreign traveler. Again, he did not throw another punch to finish them. He only looked down at the two men who started it all. He knew killing could not bring real peace. It would only grow new hatred. His voice stayed calm, but it rang through the peak like a great bell. He said he would not kill them, but they had to swear on their Tao heart. Under that fist intent that could crush mountains, there was no room to bargain before thousands of surviving disciples. Yan Wuji and Xianxia lifted their ruined arms and swore a heavenly Tao with Black Flame Sect. An Azure Cloud Sect would not go to war for 10 years. All commoners in their lands would be freed from every tax for 5 years. When the oath was finished, a dull thunder rolled in the sky. That was the heavenly Tao answering. Anyone who broke it would be devoured by heart demons. They would die and their Tao would collapse. As the oath fell, the flames of war died in an instant. The news spread like it had grown wings and reached the towns below the mountain. The survivors held each other and cried. Then they knelt toward the peak and shouted, "Golden Dragon Venerable." They treated him like a living immortal who had come to save them. Cheers surged up the mountain. Like a tide, everyone waited for this new supreme to found a sect or raise a banner and command the world. But David did not sit on that throne of power. He bent down in silence and picked up the old faded hiking pack that had crossed worlds with him. There was nothing from the modern world left inside it. Only a heavy loneliness remained. He brushed the dust from his body. He ignored the two sect masters' looks of awe and tangled fear. He refused the pleas and offerings of the survivors. He turned and walked straight down the mountain. The sunset stretched his shadow long. That lonely figure looked out of place against the crowd celebrating peace behind him. To this continent, he was a savior myth called Golden Dragon Venerable. To David, he was only a traveler still searching for the road home. When the first spring flowers bloomed, his figure had already vanished into the endless mountains. All that remained was a legend of a fist that broke the heavens for hundreds of years. It was passed from mouth to mouth across this land,